Hi, this is Demi Lovato. I'm here to remind you that taking care of your mental health is more important than ever. So many of us are struggling right now and don't know where to turn. That's why Talkspace has made it their mission to make therapy more accessible and affordable for everyone. Therapy has helped me in so many ways, and I wouldn't be where I am without it. Talkspace has made getting the support you need much easier. Take the first step towards feeling better and go to Talkspace.com and connect with a licensed therapist today. Talkspace, therapy for all.
Get $100 off your first month of Talkspace with coupon TURN.
I want to share an experience that I had while training with my NG unit at Fount McCoy in WI. I've not ever been big into paranormal activity as a subject of interest. I originally got into these topics by just gawking at some of the more outlandish things, but the deeper I dug, the more I found what seems to be genuine people sharing real experiences. This place in particular strikes me as largely honest and pretty earnest. In that spirit, I wanted to share a story about one of the few unexplainable instances that have happened in my life, certainly the most significant. So, I'm a member of the NG in Wisconsin. I moved from enlisted to officer via ROTC and was attached to a unit in my prospective MOS while on the program. I don't really want to give specifics on my service, as the community is small enough to identify me to peers in the unlikely circumstance that they're here. But in 2014, my platoon decided to conduct nighttime land navigation at Fount McCoy from 2030 to 0030. While the Army is typically all about buddy pairs, night land nav is one of the few cases that we can do things solo if we so choose. Having done night land nav plenty before, I step off alone, compass, map, and headlamp in hand. For those of you who don't know, land navigation involves seeking out markers on a course by plotting their coordinates on a map and moving there via terrain reference and compass. At night, this is typically done without light as much as possible. When light is used, it is red. This minimizes damage to night vision. Ostensibly, these methods also keep you concealed in a tactical environment when employed with noise discipline. I bring this up so that you can understand a few things about my circumstance. You see, I was moving through the woods while making a token effort to be hard to spot or hear. The woodland that I was in is part of a larger forest system, but was frequently travelled. That night, we had some 15-ish soldiers clumping around. My illumination was a toggle label headlamp, but was toggled to be red when turned on. To cycle to white light, I have to turn it off twice. The cycle was off, solid white, off, flashing white, off, solid red, off, flashing red, off, solid white. My assigned points will take me to the other side of the course and back. A good hour and a half of walking as the crow flies. They're more or less in a straight line, so I estimate 2.5 hours out and back. I know if I come back too early, though, I might be given another set of points. So I resolve to walk out, take a break for an hour, then just mosey on back. But the first half of this goes as planned, too. I get my points without much trouble and wind up sitting on a hillside at around 10 at night. It's cloudy, but the moon is full. I can see wellish when the sky is clear, poorly when it's not. Occasionally I see a red light blobbing off in the distance below me. Once a pair of platoon members passed down the hill from me, using white light to try and read their map. I startled them when I asked if they needed help. At the end of my break, there's no more motion in my area. Most people had likely already walked out and back, or they were too lost and took the handrailing road home. I'm feeling pretty at one with my surroundings, having sat in the same spot eating stale Skittles for a good long while. Owls hoot, trees sway, and all is well. I trot down my hill and step through some brush. I'm in a clearing where prairie intersects forest. There are some dead trees in the area. One of them is split halfway up, and at the top, maybe 15 feet, I could make out a head and shoulders silhouette against the clouds backlit by the moon. I walk up to ask how they got up there and if they're stuck, when the shadow twitches and I get the impression that it's turned toward me. I stand there looking at it and it's maybe looking at me, but the situation feels off. I'm not going to let a battle buddy punk me or anything, so I ask if they need a hand. Mid-sentence, the moonlight comes back, and it's clear that the thing on the tall stump is not a soldier. This moonlight glimpse is the best look that I get at this thing. It looks like a stretched out bald person. Its long arms are clutching the stump. I can't make out the face, but it looks pinched. By that I mean I couldn't see its eyes or mouth, like they were small and in the middle of its head. It's skinny like it hasn't eaten, but it's tall and obviously strong to have made such a vertical climb like that. It was definitely facing me. It probably was the whole time that I was in the clearing, in fact. Maybe since I came down the hill even. Maybe my speech startled it. Whatever the case, I swear loudly. It rapidly scurries down the trunk. I flick on my red light and catch it on all fours moving toward the brush line in the direction that I'm heading. Automatically, I keep toggling the lamp to be in white light. That means it goes off, then to flashing red. In the flash, I see the thing at the wood line, but I think that it's flipped around and is backing in, probably to keep its eyes on me. In the few seconds it takes for me to get to white light, though, it's gone. I scan the tree line, which is silent. When it moved, there was a scraping noise, plus the woodland brush is dense. If it was still running, I would hear it. I reason that it must have stopped. It must still be watching me. I fumbled out my knife and keep looking around the woods in front of me. After ages, I start inching along a perpendicular path to my initial route of travel, an angle that will link me up with the hardball road that runs up and down the side of the course. Once on the road, I can take it back to where my platoon is parked. My major problem is that the road is 10 minutes of walking away from my current position, mostly woodland too. That can't be helped. I have to get out of the clearing first. My progress on that front is painfully slow though. I'm fighting my natural urge to freeze in place like a deer in headlights. After sidestepping a good 10 meters, I hear a corresponding rustling and think that I see movement. Whatever it is though, it's enough to get me to turn and bolt, right into a down log which trips me. I scramble up to my feet and look back to the woodline where there is an audible commotion now. I glimpse a leg and a butt moving back into the woods. At this point I'm done with the whole situation, but don't want to run again. I start power walking to the road, turning to look as much as I can while seeing what this thing is doing. Over the movement of my own kit too, I can hear it moving alongside of me parallel. As I near the end of the clearing, I think that I hear it picking up pace as if to cut me off. I make the decision to sprint, and when I enter the woods my path is clear, but I think that I can hear it in my periphery. I don't stop, and run hard until I hit the paved road. I bite it hard too a few times along the way, but recover with a frantic speed that I cannot consciously replicate. Once on the road, I run perpendicular to the forest until I don't think I hear it anymore. I'm now winded from my breakout run. From the middle of the road, have good visibility and decide to walk to catch my breath. It's quiet for a while, but then I hear a branch move around 30 feet in the air from the woods that I had just fled. I snap my gaze up, see a pale, ovular face, half in shadow, peeking at me from around a trunk, and at that, I just take off again. After way too long, I make it back to the headlights of our LMTVs, and it's now 12:15. What happened, Cadet? Did you get lost out there? You're covered in mud. Did you fall down? Why are you out of breath? I got lost on my way back. Yeah, I rolled down Pikes Peak. I ran to get back in time. They all start laughing. I know better than to claim that I saw a monster. Already my reaction had left me feeling foolish, to be honest. But in the years since drilling at FMC, I have never experienced anything like that again. McCoy does not have a history of disappearances as far as I know. Neither do the closest towns, Sparta and Tomar. I've done Nightland Nav alone a few times since without issue. To be honest though, this is less from courage and more from me deciding that I must have misinterpreted the situation. But after diving into paranormal subjects, I'm coming around to the idea that, well, I should probably trust my own account. Maybe the world is weirder than I first thought. If anyone has had similar experiences elsewhere, or hopefully an explanation, then please do let me know. And thanks for making it this far. The story happened when I was 18, so around 10 years ago. After getting my driver's license, I'm Italian and here you have to wait to be 18. I was hanging out with my friends in Rome. We were 5, me and 4 passengers. It was around midnight when we hopped off into a square in the south of the city with a football or soccer ball to play with. It was during summer vacation, so it was a normal thing for us. After some time, a guy in his early 30s came to us with a big travelling bag. He wasn't creepy, but definitely was a bit strange. He was skinny, but very tonic and athletic. Short trousers, very used sneakers, a long-sleeve shirt, beard, greasy long hair, and a baseball cap. Not a common look for an Italian 30-year-old man, mind you. But he started coming over to chat and then asked if he could join us playing. We were just passing the ball without letting it touch the ground. After some minutes of playing, he started to ask us about interests and then also about our sex life. Now, I'm a bit of a shy person, but some of my friends aren't, so they started to get along with him and he started to show us, without reason, finger push-ups, one-legged squats, and some other cool exercises. One of my friends was just fooling around with him and treating him like a stupid person, asking always for more exercises. I forgot to say too that he actually hid the big bag that he had between 2 parked cars, one was mine, before he started playing with us. The friend of mine who was fooling around with him sent the ball a little bit far from us and faked a sort of asking the guy to get the ball for us. Meanwhile, my friend asked me to unlock my car. He grabbed the man's bag and throws the bag inside the back of my car and invited me and my friends to hurry and go away with this guy's bag, leaving him with the ball. In a few seconds, we were away and he started chasing us, running, but after some distance he disappeared from our rearview mirror. He was very fast though. Now, I'm not a thief by any means, but as a teen you do stupid things, right? I really didn't want to do something like this to this poor random guy though. So we went to a park near our houses and my friend started opening the bag. And this is where things started to get creepy. If you don't know Italy, then you should probably know that it's very, very uncommon that people are armed here. And inside, we found dirty clothes, a knife, not a kitchen knife too, but like a dagger, some food in a small box with a 3-digit locker. We were curious about what was in it, so we smashed it on the floor trying to open it. And after some throws, the box revealed 16 female IDs, all different. It was at this too that I started to get worried about my safety since we used my car and he might remember the license plate and maybe find it in some way. We also started thinking about who this guy could actually be and why he was carrying these things. So we went to my friend's house, we switched cars and we went back with my friend's car to the place where we met the guy just to check. We arrived there and we're hiding under the windows to make sure the car looks like it's only got one driver inside. When we got there, maybe more than 1 hour later, he was still there sitting on the car who was parked in front of mine. He didn't notice us and we went back home with a lot more doubts about him. And after 10 years, I still remember this guy. The day after, one of us went to the police with the bag saying that we found it on the road with the dagger and the IDs inside. He made an official report, lying, but surely that was the right thing to do. Right? This was in February of this year, 2021. We have a cottage about 45 minutes away from our parents' main home. It's not too far from Huntsville, Ontario, if anyone wants a visual. Thing is, it's completely unfinished. The basement has no proper flooring and has a slight water leak right now, so there are plenty of fans and sort of dehumidifiers running and stuff like that. As a result, one of us needs to check on the place at least once every 2 to 3 weeks to empty the dehumidifier in the basement and make sure everything is okay. To describe the house layout a bit though, the entrance to the basement is directly in front of the main entrance. It's a long skinny staircase down with a low roof, so you need to crouch on the way down. There is one sort of terrible light bulb on the ceiling, so it's always super dark down there too. And there's one big room, then 2 hallways sort of branching off of it. One hallway leads to a bedroom, and the other leads to not only a second bedroom, but also a washroom. All of which are completely unfinished, mind you, and without lighting. The second hallway is much longer, and the rooms are just way off in the back corner of the basement, and are completely dark. In other words, it is creepy looking. So, let me get to the day when it all went down. My mum and I headed up there to empty the dehumidifier like normal, have some lunch and clean out some junk. We're slowly gutting the place. It had been nearly 3 weeks since we'd checked up on the place by this point. We stop at the McDonald's beforehand and each get a fillet of fish combo. The first time trying one, and it was actually pretty tasty too. We get into the place and put our food on the table, then turn the heat on. The first thing that we do is we run downstairs to turn the water on and check the dehumidifier. After turning on the water, we head over to the dehumidifier and notice that there's hardly any water in it. It looks like it's only been running for a couple of days. There is still the regular amount of moisture on the ground, but it was strangely empty. My mum and I head upstairs and she grabs her phone to text my dad and ask if he had stopped by to empty the dehumidifier recently. He said that he hadn't though, and we were just both puzzled as to why it looked so empty, but never considered that there might be a third person in the house with us. Anyway, after heating up our food, we both sit down at the table and turn on the TV. About 5 minutes into our meal, we hear a massive bang downstairs, almost as if someone had stubbed their toe really badly on a cupboard or something like that. But we instantly jump and look at one another with a freaked out look in our faces. The TV is still playing rather quietly, and then we hear the worst thing. We hear a small grunt downstairs, and it was unmistakably a human vocal sound. My mum whispers to me, "Was that a person?" and I smirk and nod my head yes. Although it was freaky at the moment, I wasn't really taking it very seriously for some reason. Looking back, this was pretty serious, and this person could have been very dangerous. I just told her, though, grab your jacket and let's head out to the car and call the police. We gather our stuff, and I grab a kitchen knife on the way. If you'll recall, too, the entrance to the basement is directly across from the main entrance to the house, so I had to make this peek around the corner sort of look and was fully expecting to see a person on the dark staircase. But luckily, it was just a series of stairs down into the dark abyss. Once we were out front, though, we jump in my car and she calls the cops immediately. Within 3 minutes, 4 cruisers show up and 5 cops get out. We told them what had happened and they headed down to the driveway. They were in the house for probably 10 minutes before the door opened. A couple of cops walked out, and the third cop brought out a short, chubby guy with long black hair and pop bottle glasses. They brought him out handcuffed into the front steps, and another cop had a bag that looked like maybe it was his belongings or something. We were in our car, which was up the street a bit and facing away from the entrance of the cottage, but my mum turned away as soon as he was brought up the driveway. She didn't want to get a good look at him, as the whole situation was pretty unsettling for her. But they loaded him in the back of one of the cruisers and they took him away. One cop came over and spoke with my mum for a bit about the situation, and ultimately, my parents had decided not to press charges against the guy when it was all said and done. Apparently, he was just sleeping on the old cement ground with a small roll-out mattress, even though there was a proper bed upstairs. This made us think that he had been down that back hallway in the unfinished bedroom for a while. We probably walked downstairs to empty the dehumidifier and turn on and off the hot water a number of times, and he must have been like 15 feet away in one of the bedrooms, which is pretty creepy to think about. In the end, he probably wasn't a bad person or anything, and I'm personally at least a bit thankful that he decided to empty the dehumidifier. Hopefully he lived in there for most of the colder months this past winter. We're just lucky, I guess, that it didn't turn into one of those crazy squatting situations. So yeah, that's pretty much it, and I'm just glad that nothing bad happened in the end, because I think walking into a dark room with some weird squatter guy there probably would have given me a heart attack. So I just wanted to share my experience that I think about quite often. It was a few months ago, maybe even longer than that, maybe even almost a year ago, that it still spooks me to this day. So my house has an open kitchen and living room. The front door is facing the kitchen. As I was walking in, I saw what I thought was my roommate's boyfriend ducking down behind the kitchen counter. Doing something like that to spook me didn't seem unusual for him, to be honest, so I laughed and said something like, "Nice try, I saw you duck down." But after a moment of silence, just a super weird feeling washed over me, and I quickly walked over to the kitchen and past the counter to see that there was nobody there. I walked down into the basement, and him and my roommate were down there watching a movie or something. Now, the spot that I saw this figure duck down was the farthest spot in the room from any door, so it just wouldn't have been possible for him to duck down and then sneak out of the room, because he'd have to go past the counter right by where I was standing to do so. This isn't the first spooky thing that I've experienced in my life. Hearing glass shattering inside with no known source, stuff falling off walls, appliances acting weird. My husband has seen dark figures, but none of this was in our current home. This is the only house that I've lived in recently that I actually feel not creeped out in. Like, I can go out to the kitchen in the middle of the night for water and stuff and not even turn the lights on. But I still often think about this person I saw ducking down to hide like that.
Hi, this is Demi Lovato. I'm here to remind you that taking care of your mental health is more important than ever. So many of us are struggling right now and don't know where to turn. That's why Talkspace has made it their mission to make therapy more accessible and affordable for everyone. Therapy has helped me in so many ways, and I wouldn't be where I am without it. Talkspace has made getting the support you need much easier. Take the first step towards feeling better and go to Talkspace.com and connect with a licensed therapist today. Talkspace, therapy for all.
Get $100 off your first month of Talkspace with coupon TURN.
This was 1992. My mother was going through a bad patch in her marriage and chemotherapy for breast cancer. We lived in a very quiet town where residential areas only had small markets. For everything else, including pharmacy and public calls, we had to go to the main market, which was almost 3.5 miles from our house, 1.5 miles from our apartment blocks to Main Road, and then 2 miles to the market, either by walk or by public transport. My mother, who was going through some tough times given my father's complete disconnect with us, she used to call her brother, my uncle, for advice and catharsis, who lived in another city. For those calls, she had to go to the public call office, PCO, which was run by 2 weird men. The same market had the pharmacy where my mother would buy her medicines. Now, I was 11 and my older sister was 17, and one evening, my mother, along with my sister, went to the PCO to talk to my uncle. I don't remember why, but I think my father asked her to leave the house and she wanted to discuss her options or something. She was in distress, though, and didn't realize that it was already late when she finished the call. The market was closed, so was the public transport. My mum and sister paid the bill and started their walk home on the path next to the main road. The two PC owners closed the PCO and started following them, one on foot right behind them trying to offer a ride and the other on a bicycle next to them on the deserted main road. My mother strictly refused, held my sister's hand tightly and started walking as fast as she could, when a white van appeared on the service road and started driving slowly next to them. The PCO guys had already arranged a ride with some really bad intentions and didn't seem to go away, but they were probably waiting for them to get off the main road to strike. On the next turn, though, two men came from the opposite side on the footpath, and to my mother's relief, it was the pharmacist and his friend who were returning to pick his car from his shop's parking after a walk. They saw the man in the van and they immediately realized what was going on. They stopped, said hello, and asked if she needed help. And they agreed to walk with them home, and the PCO guys fled upon seeing these guys. The kind pharmacist saw my mother and my sister to the safety of our house, thankfully, and my mother never went to that PCO ever again. Last week, my 10-year-old son B got sick one night, vomiting, fever, etc. So, the next morning I kept him home from school. I accidentally forgot to call the attendance line and report him absent. And about half an hour after school starting that morning, my fiancé called me from work freaking out asking where B was. I informed him that he was homesick, which my fiancé didn't know because he had left super early that morning for work. But apparently, the school had been frantically calling me, but my phone never rang and I had no missed calls, and then called my fiancé because numerous students and teachers had seen B at breakfast, served before school starts. B is always there early for breakfast. But he was also absent from class when school began. Many students swore that they had seen B at breakfast, but B was acting weird and didn't respond to them and stuff like that. Very odd because B is a very outgoing and social person. It even escalated to the point that some students had seen B running onto the stage in the auditorium and hiding. Teachers were literally using flashlights to search, even up in the stage rafters for him because he had supposedly even been spotted up there. One of his best friends even called B from school that morning because she was worried and B's phone never rang. She also texted and, you guessed it, no text was received. The police had even been notified and were en route to the school, until my fiancé called me and I called the school immediately to inform them that B was homesick. I have tried to obtain more details about all of this, but even the school secretary seemed weirded out by it and was just like, okay, well, glad he's okay. Must have been another student that looks like him. From the info that I've gathered, though, nobody actually spoke to B that morning because he ignored us and just stared down at his food tray. When asked about what he was wearing, all I got was a hoodie and sweatpants, his usual everyday attire. Bottom line, this whole thing really freaked me out. His friends, and even his teachers. Do you guys have any idea about what happened here? My girlfriend and I were months away from being parents for the first time, and we were both working jobs. I worked in retail as a key holder. She was working as an assistant manager at a place in the local strip mall. After my shift one day, I took the deposit bag, wrapped it up in my work clothes, put all of that in a bag, and I went to walk for 5 or so minutes to my girlfriend's work. Just before I got to the door of the mall, though, a man came up and asked me if I could help start his car. He needs to get to work, but he can't do it himself. Now, growing up, my family had cars like that, so I was like, must be the air intake or whatever, and said that I would help. We walk around the corner of the mall to where the car is sitting, and that's the car that I'm going to help start, I think to myself. But the man says, so we just need to get in and I'll drive you to my car. I need help starting it. And the hairs on the back of my neck start to rise. I have ignored gut instincts before. That's how I am with this girlfriend at this time, but this is a sensation that very clearly is telling me, ignore these psychological warnings at your certain peril. I quickly explained to him that I thought this was going to be a very quick thing and I have somewhere that I need to be and I'm already late. I apologize and walk away from him into the mall and watch him leave in the car before going to my girlfriend's workplace. I tell her that we're going to scrap our plans for dinner and make it home ASAP, dropping the deposit bag along the way. As we're passing the parking lots to head to the bank in a roundabout way, we see the same dude who was in a hurry to get to work, slowly driving around a Target parking lot, just scoping people out. There is no doubt in my mind that I would have certainly regretted getting into a car with that man that day. In fact, there's a good chance that I wouldn't be sharing this story today if I had. When I was in year 8, 1998, I was invited to a sleepover, a birthday party. They had set up a tent in the backyard, and altogether there were 8 girls, including me. The girl whose birthday it was lived only with her mum, who was a religious type, and she was inside. We started doing some things, like acting, like a talent quest type of thing, and my best friend and I stood up in the tent, and we're doing some form of a dance singing routine or something. But during it, my best friend put her hand to the top of the tent and felt a tap on her hand. So we all sort of stopped, and I put my hand up and felt 3 taps on my hand in a sort of triangle formation, basically. Being 13-year-old girls, we were like, what is that? And sort of giggling. But then, the whole tent started shaking. Shaking violently. The girls that were sitting down were holding each other, crying and screaming. They were that scared. Then one girl decided to bolt for the house, so we all followed. As I was running back to the house, I looked back and the tent was still shaking, but when I did, there was nobody there. We ran inside regardless, screaming. The mother came out of her room in her PJs. It was late, around 12:30 a.m., asking us what was wrong. We told her, but she basically thought that we were just being stupid. We slept in the lounge that night, but we must have talked probably until at least 4 a.m. on what we thought had actually happened. We attended a Catholic school at the time, and 2 of the girls who actually went there went to counseling at the school because, well, they were that frightened by the whole thing. I still to this day just have no idea what actually happened that night. It was in a country town, but there were houses on either side, but with high fences. The backyard was gated with locks, and the house was really old. When we were talking until early morning, though, the girl who lived there stated that the neighbors weren't the type to have done something like this, so nothing just added up. But I'll never forget it. I'll never forget turning around and seeing the entire tent shaking like that with nothing there. And also the feeling of the tapping on my hand. My friends and I used to camp a lot in the El Dorado National Forest. We had a spot along Sopiago Springs that we used to camp at a lot, and one weekend we decided to go for a 3-day foraging camp. We brought in MREs in case we couldn't find anything, some guns, and some supplies to set up some shelter, but that was pretty much it. The first night was chill too. We cooked a bunch of stuff and a squirrel that my buddy shot, drank a few beers that we brought, and we slept fine. But the next day, something just felt off to me. One of my friends who was with me and we had some really creepy experiences in this part of the forest in the past, and it felt a bit like those. For instance, the forest was just dead silent, and we always felt like something was watching us. I grew up in the woods too, so I knew the signs of a predator, but this felt different than a bear or a mountain lion. When night fell though, my friends went 200 yards or so up to the stream to do some stuff, and I was alone in camp. And the feeling, man, did it get even stronger. So I built up the fire nice and big, and I grabbed a gun. But then I kept hearing faint voices from the woods in the opposite direction of where my friends went. They were low, indistinct sounds, but they were really creeping me out. And my buddies had taken the only 2 flashlights. Poor planning in hindsight, I know. As I peered out into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of something moving 50 yards or so out in the trees. I snapped the rifle to my shoulder and I got the scope on it. It was really dark though, and the only light was from the fire, but I could see the outline of what I was aiming at. And strangely, it looked human, but was on all fours, and its arms seemed a lot longer than they should be. It stood a bit like maybe an ape, but really low to the ground. I only saw it for a second or two as well before it just sort of loped off deeper into the woods. After I lost track of it though, I would hear light rustling in different directions around the camp, leaves scuffling, the occasional twig breaking, stuff like that. Always away from where my friends went, like in the 180 degree of the other side of the camp from their departure. I got the sense, though, that whatever it was definitely stalking me. I kept the fire high, and I was staying sharp, looking out into the woods, but I didn't see it again. My buddies came back about 10 minutes later to find me an absolute paranoid wreck, glassing the tree line with the scope. I told them what happened, and they just got really quiet. And then told me the reason that they came back when they did is that they had started to hear the same stuff that I did over by where they were, and it really spooked them. We spent the second night of our trip with a huge fire and 3 lookouts. Nobody slept that night, and in the morning we just broke camp as quick as we could, and we just hightailed it out of there. And we never camped in that spot again. So for context, I'm a 5'3", 24-year-old female and working as a programmer for an IT company in the Philippines. Now, the area where my office is in comprises of 3 buildings. Building A, where my office is, Building B, and Building C. And to get to the other building, it would take you like around 10 minutes to get there, which is important for this story. So, this happened to me about a year ago around the end of February, until about March. I just got out of a bad breakup at that time, and I really intended to just focus on myself and not meet anyone yet. I just got out of work, and it's around 7 p.m. on Friday night, and I went to my usual waiting spot, which has benches and is located at the back of our building near the entrance of the underground parking, for our company shuttle, and Omar, shuttle dispatcher, is there. Now, I've known Omar for 2 years and is someone that I would consider now as a friend, and we would often just chat about our lives and whatnot, even the breakup with my ex then, and just sort of joke around a bit. He's a 40-plus-year-old guy, and he gives out this big fatherly vibe, so he's really someone that I trust. And that night he was there and with someone new that I didn't recognize. Our conversation went like this. "Hey, how's it going? A good thing you're here, actually. I would like you to meet someone since he told me he really wants to meet you for a long time now." And then this guy stood up and shook my hand. I greeted him just to be polite, and this new guy, his name was Ray, I think. He's average looking and a little shorter to my height, 5'1", but he instantly just gave a sort of off vibe as soon as I shook his hand. I honestly thought that would be the end of it, but he proceeded to talk to me for a few minutes while I waited for my shuttle to arrive. Omar had purposefully left me and this Ray guy so that we could talk and get to know each other. I'm actually quite puzzled at this point though, because, well, one, I have no clue who this guy is and why he would be so eager to meet me, and two, I clearly told Omar before that I'm not into meeting anyone just yet. But for the sake of being polite and nice, I talked to Ray, but we never reached any sort of personal questions, exchanging numbers or social media accounts, or even telling him my full name. I just told him my nickname, and I left it just at that when I finally got on the shuttle. Fast forward to a week and a Friday again. I got off work at the same time, and surprise, surprise, Ray is there again with Omar and a security guard. They were chatting, but as soon as I came by, Ray instantly greeted me, and at this point, I'm a little creeped out, I'll admit, as I expected our encounter would only be a one-time thing. I just said hi and just sort of brushed him off and sat on the benches to wait for my shuttle again. And of course, as this guy doesn't seem to know the definition of personal space, he sits beside me and tries to talk to me again, but this time he's asking for my cell phone number. I sort of told him off and clearly said that I'm not giving out my number to strangers and just giving him one-word answers just to give an impression that I definitely wasn't interested at all. He would ask things like, why wouldn't you give your number? I just want to be friends. I could see in his face that he was getting frustrated every time that I told him that I wasn't going to give it to him. This all happened too while Omar and the security guard were looking at us from afar, and this went on until I got onto the shuttle again. As soon as I got home, I just sort of mindlessly scrolled through my timeline, and I saw a notification that I have a new friend request, and you've probably guessed it, it's Ray. He even messaged me with a please accept my friend request. I just deleted his request, but now I'm pretty shocked since I didn't tell him my Facebook account, so how did he manage to find me in the first place? The following day, though, was the last straw when I decided to get off at an earlier time so that I could avoid him, but to my surprise, he was there again, waiting for me, along with Omar and the security guard again. Ray immediately ran up to me to say hi, but I brushed him off and dreaded the fact that I was going to have to wait with this creep again when I saw my shuttle bus wasn't there yet. He immediately asked me too if I had accepted his Facebook request, and I decided to play dumb and said that I haven't been active on Facebook and I haven't seen any requests. He got disappointed and he fiddled with his phone for a bit and then revealed his phone to show my Facebook profile and asked me if this was me. I said yes, and this time I was completely ignoring him at this point and playing with my phone and told him that I wasn't going to accept his request because I don't know him. And then Ray grabbed my phone out of my hands angrily and said that he was going to add himself using my Facebook account if I won't. I muttered a "what the heck?" and grabbed my phone from him, and with perfect timing I got on the shuttle in a hurry and told the driver to go. At this point, I could confirm that this guy could be stalking me and now knows my daily schedule and social media accounts. I reported this incident to my manager and told her how this was already happening for some time now. She was surprised that I didn't report it earlier, but I blamed it on my lack of assertiveness and fear that I must just be overreacting to his advances. We reported the incident to the office security and told them what had happened, and unfortunately they couldn't do anything at first as, one, I need actual evidence about my allegations against him, and two, I only knew Ray by his first name and they would need more information than that. I didn't bother to ask him where he was from or if he even worked in our office building, which is dumb of me, I know, and I should have asked in the first place. My manager, though, then decided that I should be at least accompanied by some of my office mates to confirm the situation, and the guys volunteered to accompany me every time that I got off work. And thankfully, they accompanied me for a couple of days, and no matter what time I got out, Ray was always there to harass me. I sort of felt bad for my office mates as they had to deal with this BS as well. But the first instance when he saw that I was with my office mates, I could see the sort of visible anger in his eyes, and he would try to butt in our conversations even if we were ignoring him. At one point, when I'm talking with my office mates, he let out a sort of exasperated sigh and said, "Ugh, can I talk to you for a second, please?" I was like, "What do you want?" "I just want to talk to you. If you don't, I'll leave then." "Okay." And then I just went back to talking to my office mates. He butted in once more and asked that I should introduce him to my office mates. When I didn't, he proceeded to introduce himself, which irked the heck out of my office mates and I as well, as his behavior doesn't seem normal at all. But after that incident, my office mates and I told my manager what happened and how dangerous this guy could be. she decided that we should escalate it to HR and have them deal with it immediately. And thankfully, HR responded and took the situation seriously and began to do an investigation on who Ray might be. Same day, they sent an email that, after searching through the records, it turns out that Ray wasn't actually an employee of our office, and they might need to talk to the building security to find out more about this guy. HR also requested our office security to escort me and observe the situation. I honestly felt relieved, as now I'll finally be safe for the time being while they search who Ray might be. And he still showed up, even if I got out late or earlier than usual, but never went near me when he saw that I was accompanied by security, but he would just sort of keep a distance and stare at me, smile creepily, and linger outside my shuttle until it left. But then, HR contacted me for a meeting with them, and with my manager too, about some news on Ray, and I was shocked by the information that they had found out. So firstly, Ray was definitely not an employee of our building or office, but in fact a temp in the security office in Building C. I then thought, okay, so this creep is really putting an effort in for someone who is clearly not interested, and if he's a temp, meaning there's a chance that I won't be able to see him after this, that's great. But then, what HR said chilled me to the bone. Apparently, he was a temp assigned to work on security cameras, meaning that he had access to all of the building's cameras. And it has been his way to spy on me, and the reason why he was able to be there at the exact time that I got out every single time. HR has already spoken to his supervisor and gave a warning to Ray, and of course, Ray denied the allegations, even if I had witnesses against him. The supervisor wanted to apologize to me in person, but I decided not to, as I just wanted this to be over with. But after that meeting, I never saw Ray again, and I thought that he must have been kicked out after HR issued a warning against him or something. As for Omar, I never saw him as well, and I felt bad, but he was sort of also a part of the people who enabled Ray, and didn't do anything when I was clearly getting harassed. I did receive a bit of backlash from the security guards in the building for a while as well, hearing them say that I was overreacting and I should have accepted his advances, which to me was sort of disgusting, as I had heard the same thing being said by female building staff as well. But nothing really strange happened for a few days at least. But then, the security guard that was with Omar at the time when Ray was harassing me added me on Facebook, but I didn't make much of it, and I just deleted the request again. I'm currently still working in the same office in the building as of today, and I've been totally shaken up by the incident, so I decided to just keep my distance from people so that I could avoid things like this ever happening again. I don't know if Ray will be back at some point. I don't know if Omar will come back. I really have no idea where they are or what's happened to them, but this whole situation's got me shaken up for sure. So my friend, we both go to the same university, was telling me a story about a guy who confessed his love to her via a sort of fake Instagram account. He sent her a really long paragraph describing his love to her and refused to give her his identity for a very long time, but he eventually did after she promised him not to tell anyone. She just told me the story without revealing who he really was. Turns out, though, that this was the same guy who used to harass her 5 years ago by constantly calling her on the phone. She would block his number and he would come up with a new one every single day for like 2 months until he finally just gave up. The thing is, I was talking to another friend, different uni, when she also told me that there was a guy who confessed his love to her via a fake Instagram account. She sent me screenshots of the messages and you guessed it, it was the same account, and he sent her the exact same paragraphs. I was shocked, and I immediately told my friend number one the story and asked her to reveal his identity. When she did, I was even more shocked because I went to the same high school with this guy, and I can tell you that this guy is the definition of creepy. He used to harass all his girl classmates, including me, by sending them text messages and calling them from different phone numbers every time. The weird thing was that he just sort of knew everyone's, and I'm not even exaggerating, literally everyone's phone numbers. You can ask him for any random person's number, and he would give it to you right away. My classmate once told me, though, that she was staying at a friend's place and he, as usual, started calling her non-stop in the middle of the night. She was ignoring him until she sent him a message telling him to stop calling her because, well, her phone was about to die and she'd forgotten to bring her charger. But then, 5 minutes later, he sent her a message telling her to look at the front of her friend's front door. And when she did, she found a phone charger on the doorstep. This is only one of the many, many countless really creepy stories that my friends have told me about this guy, and I don't know what he's capable of, but he definitely is really creeping us out. So my friend was staying over at my house for the weekend at one point, and we decided to walk down to the pier at the end of the creek. Well, we left a little before noon, and we checked the time because my mum was going to pick her up at around 4, and we didn't want to get in trouble. I am absolutely sure, too, that we just left a few minutes before noon instead of misreading the clock, because the noon alarm sounded before we got to the road that went to the creek. The noon alarm was basically a loud siren that the fire department would test every Sunday at 12. I think it might have been on a timer too, because it always happened at noon, and the only other use for the siren was for emergencies like a tornado warning or something like that. We turned on the road that led to the trail to the creek, walked all the way there, messed around doing whatever it was that we did. That's the only part of the story that I don't specifically remember, but it's not really that important, I think, since nothing strange happened. But then we went home. I think it was probably about 3/4 of a mile to the creek, but I'm not great at estimates, so it could be shorter or longer, but not by much. But regardless, we had been gone for at least 2 hours. Now, I have always been a pretty good judge of how much time had passed. So much so that when I'm cooking food, I don't even need to set an alarm. People joke about how it's almost like a magic power, I'm so good at it. But even if I was horrible at keeping time, it's quite a long walk and it would have been impossible to do in 10 minutes. But when we returned from the creek, my mum just looked at us and said, "Oh, I thought you were going to the creek." We told her that we already did, and I don't think she argued because, well, I was a weird kid and she was a busy mum who did all of her chores on Sundays. But when we looked at the clock, it was 12:07, which means that we had been there and back in like 7 minutes, which is just impossible because there's just no way that we could have walked all the way to the creek and back in that short amount of time. We spent our remaining 4 hours together trying to explain what happened after that, but to this day I still can't explain it. It's not the weirdest glitch that I've ever experienced, but I think it was my first one, which, I don't know, maybe it's significant and maybe it's related to all of these other things that have happened in my life, but it's something that I'll never forget. So I grew up in northern Michigan, USA, about 30 miles southwest of Traverse City. My grandparents also live about 5 minutes from where I grew up and have a large acreage of woods, about 117. Growing up, and still to this day, they have an old golf cart and have created long, sprawling trails in those woods. And somewhere in the middle of the acreage is a field, about 2 acres in area, that has an old sawmill. Now, about 7 years ago, when I was about 13, my sisters, who were 9 and 8, and I decided to go on a golf cart ride through the woods and the trails. My 9-year-old sister sat up in front with me, while the 8-year-old sat on the back on a mounted seat facing the opposite way. We drove up toward the field, and once we got through the trees and into the field, I drove about maybe 100 feet in, and I saw this figure a ways ahead of me. Now, it was probably about 10 feet tall, was sort of humanly shaped, but then I noticed that Its legs kind of dragged as it walked, and it was hunched over, and its arms looked sort of detached and dangled. And then I noticed that its face was kind of just a gaping black hole. But I saw what I thought was a dangling eye, maybe? My 9-year-old sister saw it too, and it began to run towards us, and I quickly whipped the car around, and we sped home. My grandpa went out with the gun to the field, and he didn't find anything. I haven't been able to find anything on this for years, since my sister and I were truly terrified about this day for a long time, and we tried a lot to find out what this thing was. And in the end, the only legend that I know from up there is the Dogman, and I'm pretty sure that it wasn't that. But have any of you guys ever seen or experienced something similar to this? This happened about 6 years ago, and I'm a 23-year-old female. I'm also really small. I'm like 4'11" and weigh like 95 pounds soaking wet. And no, I don't have an eating disorder or anything, it's just who I am. So my 11th grade year of high school is when this event took place. It was within the first 2 weeks of school when I was riding the bus, and we had a new bus driver. For me being a very social person, I always thanked him for his service and was always really nice to him, and I believe that may have been where I messed up. Because one day after school, I was riding the bus. I was always one of the first to be dropped off, so when I realized that I'd been on the bus for an extra 10 minutes, I was a little curious, I admit, and just chalked it up to the fact that maybe the bus route had changed or something. But then, after some time, I was on the bus for about 30 minutes, and there were 2 kids left on the bus, an old friend of mine and, of course, myself. This friend of mine lived in a very remote location, and there was absolutely no cell service out there, so when we dropped her off, I couldn't call my parents to let them know what was happening. My friend, I think, caught on to what was happening too, and tried really hard to convince me to get off at her stop. Little did I know, though, that I probably should have listened. Now, as we were leaving this area, the bus driver pulled into a cemetery and told me to look out my window. When I did, I saw a torn to shreds baby deer. Upon seeing this and realizing that I was now alone in this bus, away from anyone and anything, with no cell service, my whole body just completely went into shutdown mode, because I had no idea what to do. My initial reaction was to pull out my phone and call my parents when I suddenly remembered that I had no signal. I immediately got up and ran to the back of the bus. Keep in mind, I'm the only kid on this bus now. We must have sat by that deer for a good 10 minutes too, and the whole time I'm in the back and my blood is absolutely boiling. It took everything in me not to run off that bus and look for help, but when we started to leave, he just started talking about random things like how he loves his wife and loves his new job as a bus driver. The whole time he's barely paying attention to the road, but I eventually get on my phone and I go to Google Maps, and thank God that they work without service. And I realized that my house was like 15 minutes from where we were, and I was really excited to be going home soon. But boy, was I wrong. This guy then decides to take a huge amount of back roads and keeps talking to me. All the while, I'm just sitting in silence, no service on my phone again. And about 20 to 25 minutes later, I finally start seeing landmarks that are around my neighborhood. I finally get service on my phone again, and I immediately call my dad. He doesn't answer, but not even 2 minutes later, we pull into my neighborhood and he drops me off at my house. I wanted to run, but for some reason I just sort of stood there in my yard and stared at him, frozen in fear, and he just stared right back. Eventually he pulled off, and when he did, I just took off running to my house. But my parents were in their room freaking out about where I was. My mum started grilling me about where I was and what I was doing. I get out of school at like 2:15, and it was now 4:45-ish. On a normal day, I would get home at like 2:30, so my mum was pretty upset. My dad's phone was dead because he tried to call me so many times, but I just began to cry and tell them everything that happened. My dad was furious though and called my school and used my mum's phone to record the whole conversation between my dad and the principal and myself. My principal was extremely ticked off too about what had taken place, as was my dad. My mother was just cuddling me, asking me if I was okay and if anything else happened. I didn't go back to school for about 2 days. There was no formal investigation as far as I know. The school apparently handled it themselves. The bus driver denied everything, but when they checked the camera footage, the camera happened to be covered by a sticker or some tape or something of the sort. Thankfully, nobody believed the bus driver though, and he was eventually fined. And I haven't rode a bus ever since then. In the 1970s, I lived in what I believed to have been a haunted house. It was apparently widely known in our town, but our family had just moved into it, so we had no idea, but I learned later that it was apparently haunted. In fact, the personal people that had been living in it before us supposedly moved out because she was having problems with frightening incidences in the home. Of course, our parents didn't tell myself or my little sister this information, as they believed that we were just too young and impressionable. They didn't want to scare us, nor did they want us to blow things out of proportion. In the end, though, they didn't have to tell us, especially not me. I figured it out rather quickly on my own, in fact. My first experience that I just couldn't explain happened on a bright weekday afternoon. My sister and I were pretty much latchkey kids, as our parents both worked. At this time, my sister was like 6 years old and I was 11. We rode the school bus home and we went inside to have a snack and do our chores and whatnot. Once done, my sister went to the neighbor girl's house to play and I decided to take a shower. Now, let me reiterate too that I was completely alone in this house at this time. It was an old home, built back in the early 1900s. It is possible that it was maybe very late 1800s. I recently saw an image of the house that was taken in 1901, so I'm not 100% sure of the exact age. But it was large and 3 stories high. Upstairs held the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Above, through a door in the ceiling in the bathroom, there was an attic. And I went into said bathroom and I climbed into the shower and began washing off the dust and the grime from a long day at school. I was just sort of lost in thought, as one often is in the shower, and scrubbing my hair with Prel, when suddenly there was a loud knock at the bathroom door 3 times. Startled, I said, "What? I'm in the shower." I was annoyed because I was pretty sure that it must have been my little sister having come in from outside to use the bathroom. But ultimately, there was just no answer. What the heck, right? I ignored the issue though, and I just continued washing my hair. After a minute or so, and just as I began to rinse, another 3 loud knockings at the door. This time, I jumped too because it was totally unexpected. My eyes were full of soap bubbles though, and I was now very irritated. So I yelled, "Nicole, what the heck do you want? I'm in the shower." I strained to hear my sister through the bathroom door, but there was no answer and no sound. It felt to me though as if someone was listening. "Quit screwing around," I shouted. I quickly rinsed off and, leaving the shower running, very carefully stepped outside the curtain, making sure not to alert anyone who might be listening. I wrapped a towel around me and waited to catch whoever was out there. I stood right at the door, my hand poised to grab the knob. I stood there for some time too, and as you might have guessed, nothing happened. I sort of mumbled to myself and climbed back into the shower, but the very second the water hit my face, there was a knock at the door again, 3 times. This time the knocks were clearly deliberate too, but how did whoever was out there know that I climbed back into the shower? This was weird now, and even I knew it. I turned the shower water off and I yelled, "Who is it?" And the second the last word tumbled out of my mouth, 3 knocks again. In one fluent motion, I pulled the curtain around me and leaned out of the tub, grabbed the doorknob and yanked the door open. The door was literally right next to the bathtub. And when I did, there was nobody there. No one. No giggling little sister who was not interested really in playing elaborate pranks anyway. She was only 6 after all. No parents, no friends, nothing. Upon seeing this too, I threw on my robe, ran into my parents' room, and I looked around. And then my bedroom and my sister's next. But there was nobody upstairs with me. I would have heard and seen anyone on the stairs too. They were old and they creaked terribly. It was at this point too that I was suddenly quite scared. Something had been clearly knocking on the door. Whatever it was, it wanted my attention. Suffice it to say, too, that it definitely got it. I quickly made my way downstairs, and as I passed the window on the landing, I saw my sister and her little friend playing Barbies on the porch outdoors. But I'm certain that it hadn't been my sister. This, as I said, was only the first experience that I had in that house. There were several others in that house, one of which actually could have killed my sister, but maybe I'll share that another time. This will have to do for now, as it's a lot to think about. Wendell was a panhandler near my college. I always gave him my change when I had extra. Usually I keep a hard rule not to give money to individuals because I give it to known local charities instead, where I can be sure that the money is going to a specific cause. This one panhandler, though, he always sang opera music, but quite beautifully as well, all things considered. Even though it was clear that he was begging for money due to poverty and homelessness, not busking for tips, I always thought that it was admirable that he was trying to perform a service in exchange for money, and I don't like carrying coins, so I gave him what I could. It wasn't much, barely $1 each time, if that. But I would occasionally strike up conversations with Wendell, even if I didn't have any money for him. He actually liked to make students laugh with funny impressions or jokes. He was a bit older. I'm like an undergrad. He was probably 40s or 50s. So we'd mostly just have quick chats about the news or the weather or whatever it was, and nothing deep, and then I'd be on my way. Sometimes, though, he would just randomly share something so intimate that I'd feel obligated to reciprocate with something at least superficially personal. For example, he'd blurt out things like he'd almost went to college on a baseball scholarship, but drugs ruined everything. I would be like, "Oh wow, I'm really sorry to hear that. I played volleyball. Not for a scholarship, though. See you around, okay?" Once, though, Wendell called me over while I was walking with a professor, my advisor, and I didn't want to be rude, so I went over to just say a quick hello and introduced my advisor. When we walked away, my advisor was pretty clearly horrified and asked why Wendell knew me by my name. I explained our little friendship, and he said that the homeless in this city weren't like the homeless in my smaller town back home. I figured that he was being a bit of an elitist, and I think that he could tell that I hadn't taken him seriously because after we dropped the subject, just before I left, he reiterated that I shouldn't forge friendships with the homeless population in this city or even give them money because the chronically homeless, the ones on the streets enough that you could get to know them, tended to have criminal or addictive histories. I was surprised because my advisor is usually pretty progressive and compassionate, so I appealed to him with Wendell is a victim of a post-capitalist society and all the other things that I'd learned in his very own classes, but he wasn't having any of it, basically saying that however Wendell became chronically homeless, now he was, and I should act accordingly. So my professor strongly implored me not to continue even talking to Wendell, like at all. I kind of shook my head thinking, okay boomer, and if anything, felt fortified by the warning, like it was a confirmation that I was a radical doing the right thing, leading a new path, breaking down barriers, battering society. I got closer to Wendell as well, and I shared more about my life with him. But the very next time that I talked to Wendell, he was really irritable and distant, and I just wasn't sure why. Until he said, "So, your boyfriend, huh? You two live together or what?" I had no idea what he was talking about, but I said, "What boyfriend?" And he said, "The guy I met from yesterday that you were walking down the street with." I laughed at this, explaining that it wasn't my boyfriend. It was just my academic advisor. Then, all of a sudden, he just wasn't irritable anymore. He was chatty as he'd ever been. I probably should have taken that as a red flag, I know, but I didn't think about Wendell much at all then. In fact, I only really saw him once or twice a week, and only for a few minutes. It was around then, though, that Wendell started bringing me gifts. I'd pass him, and he'd have a flower for me or a metal machine piece, and I never refused because I figured it was a means of preserving his dignity when accepting money, like with his opera singing. One of my roommates, though, did remark on the flower once, and when I explained, she said that it was weird. I thought that she was just being elitist as well, and that I was enlightened, bridging the class divide, and superior to her neoliberal paranoia. I mean, come on, it was just a flower, right? My advisor clocked onto all of this, so brought it up with me again a while later, saying that he was worried that I was being manipulated. I tried to tell him about Wendell's opera singing and impressions and how he even almost went to college, but then I remembered the reason that he lost his baseball scholarship, and I sort of stopped short. Looking at it through that lens kind of made me reconsider the whole thing. I thought about what my professor had said, sparing the details. We would talk for like half an hour, and I finally connected the dots that Wendell did have a history of drug use, and he did sometimes mention how a previous girlfriend overreacted to something that he'd done, and it had derailed his life besides the drugs. And so I decided that maybe I should think about distancing myself, even just a little bit. But very shortly after, the pandemic hit and classes went virtual, so to save on rent, I went home to my parents' house, still in the state, but not near campus at all. About 3 weeks into being home, I was watching a friend's Insta story when I heard Wendell singing opera in the background, and I thought, oh yeah, I forgot all about him. I hope he's doing okay. That was that, and I just kept watching different stories. Later that night, though, something about the story just kind of stuck in my gut. It had popped into my mind a few times subconsciously, and I'd ignored it, but it just kept coming back, so I decided that I should go and watch it again. That's when I realized that my friend's video wasn't from our college town. In fact, it was from my much smaller hometown, which is nowhere near my college. I'll admit that freaked me out a bit, but I figured everyone moved around when the pandemic hit, so my town isn't that small as well. It isn't that far from the college. It was probably a coincidence. I really wanted to mention it to my parents, but they had always warned me against talking to the homeless. Besides something like, can I buy you a meal or something? So I just felt too embarrassed to explain the situation to them, especially since it was probably a coincidence, and I would sound so conceited if I were like, hey, he definitely followed me because aren't I just so great that he's probably obsessed with me? We have a type 1 diabetic in the family too, so we took quarantining pretty seriously. I figured too that I'll never see him anyways. I'm not going out anytime soon, so it doesn't matter where he is. And nothing ever happened. Well, except one thing. You see, a girl from high school who also ended up at my college called me and in summary said, "This is going to sound really weird, but I feel like I should say something. I was downtown and a beggar asked me about you, like specifically you. He knew that you were on club volleyball and he knew you're a major. I didn't tell him anything, but I just thought that you should know." I was pretty alarmed at first because, well, how would he know that I know this girl? But once we talked, I learned that she'd been wearing a sweatshirt from her college, so I thought about it and decided that he probably saw that sweatshirt, figured that she might know me from college since we were both from this town, and was just trying to find out how I was doing. I thought that it was sweet, in fact. Although a little weird, I admit, but he was a little weird. That was a part of his charm. I thanked her, but told her not to worry about it. Besides, I wasn't in town much longer anyways. I had decided to go and live back near campus. It was impossible to get my coursework done with my family around all day, so it was going to happen. And I went back to campus a while later. Didn't think about Wendell at all. Until I saw him back on the same corner just a week after I returned to campus. And this time, even I knew that something was wrong. It was at this point that I stopped giving him money, stopped talking to him, but I was just so humiliated by how high and mighty I'd been insisting that nothing was wrong and everyone else was being paranoid and elitist that I decided not to tell anyone about what I had noticed. I was already barely leaving my apartment anyway, never going on campus, and his usual spot was right by campus. I felt bad about potentially hurting his feelings or reading too far into the situation, but I figured that he'd get the message, and better safe than sorry, right? After finals, I decided to visit my brother too, in a different state. His roommate had moved home, leaving an extra bed, so I drove to his place to celebrate the end of the year and get away from it all. And it must have been about the 9th day in when I was woken up way earlier than usual. When my brother isn't working or in school, he sleeps until noon, to the sound of my brother talking at the door. I sort of groggily got up to see what was going on because we weren't seeing anyone. We stayed totally quarantined. His state was being hit pretty hard. My brother was talking nicely to somebody outside through a crack in the door, but when he turned to look at me, he looked royally annoyed at me. He turned back outside and said, "Hold on here," closed the door, despite the other guy protesting, but I couldn't hear what he said exactly. My brother immediately got in my face and whisper-yelled, "Mum and Dad are going to kill you." I had no idea what he was talking about at first, but my first thought was that the cops had come to arrest me for something. I mean, it was the only logical thought that I could generate first thing in the morning, and the only thing that I could imagine being arrested for was my fake ID, which I only ever used to get into concerts, and obviously none lately. So I was actually in a lot of shock. But my brother was still going, and as best as I can remember, because I was panicked at this point, he was saying, "And I'm going to kill you. This is so not cool. You didn't even ask. I wouldn't have said yes anyways, but you didn't even think to ask." I realized then that didn't align with being arrested, so finally I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "You're dating a 40-year-old guy? Older? 45 maybe? Of all the people out there. I mean, come on. Dad's going to kill you and then have a heart attack and die again, which will kill Mum. And you invited him to my house while we're supposed to be social distancing? You two have to go to a hotel because he isn't coming in here, alright? I wasn't mean to him out of respect for you, but if he doesn't leave now, that's going to change." I had no idea what he was talking about. None still. I hadn't connected any of the pieces yet. Because you've got to remember that Wendell was such a small part of my life until this point. I almost never saw him and even thought about him. My whole world had been turned upside down by a pandemic in the preceding few months. He was background noise. Faint background noise, in fact, compared to all the other stuff that had been going on anyway. So I just said the first thing that came to mind. "Dude, I don't know why you're getting so mad at me. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone's got the wrong house, okay?" My brother looked like he was ready to rip my face off, and he said, "We're adults, come on, don't lie to me. I'm not Mum and Dad. We can't deal with this if you're going to lie to my face." And I said that I wasn't lying, and I think you could tell from my expression and tone that I was genuinely serious too. So now, he was as confused and irritated as I was, and he was like, "But he didn't just vaguely say that he was here for his girlfriend. He used your name. He rattled off a ton of very exact info. I think he said he said you guys had a fight and he was here to work things out. Now, I've been looking for a boyfriend for a long time, I'll admit, so I was half thinking, maybe dreams do come true. Might as well see who it is. But I was also starting to feel a bit sick in the pit of my stomach for some reason, because it would be one thing if this happened on campus or back home, but I had changed states. My brother moved to this state for school, and I don't know anyone here but him and his friends. So I finally did the obvious thing and looked through the peephole. And I almost didn't recognize him at first because he had showered, shaved, and changed into clean clothes for the first time since I'd known him. But sure as heck, it was Wendell, standing on my brother's doorstep, hundreds of miles from his original corner. I was honestly so scared that I couldn't even speak. My heart was pounding like I was slipping under deep water with my legs tied. I just backed away from the door and I sat on the couch and tried to collect myself. My brother thought that it was my affirming that there really was some secret older boyfriend who had just made himself known, so it took a minute for him to cut off his ranting and his dramatic what will grandma think stuff. But finally, he realized that I was tearing up and he sat down, calmed down, and apologized and said that we'd figure it out. And I whispered, still out of breath, "No, you don't understand. He followed me here." My brother still didn't get it, and he said, "What? You didn't want him to come here? What was your fight about?" Still thinking this guy was my boyfriend. I managed to repress my panic enough to explain the broad strokes to him, but I don't think he fully grasped just how creepy it was in the moment, because he was like, "You're kidding me? That's hilarious. I'll take care of this." He went to the door and called from behind it, "Hey, just checked. She's not here. Must have packed out this morning. And listen, you should do the same, okay? I'm taking this social distancing thing real serious, alright?" And he winked at me. That's when, as my brother says when he tells this story, it got real. Wendell then said, "You're lying. I heard her in there. Tell her I'm sorry. I don't know why she's been avoiding me, but I got cleaned up for her, and I'll take her anywhere that she wants to go. Tell her that. Tell her, and don't lie. I'll know if you lie." That rubbed my brother the wrong way, and he said, "Bro, you're not taking her anywhere. Now get off my deck before we have a problem." And Wendell sounded like he was walking away, but instead, he was going over to the window. When I saw him staring, he looked different than I had ever seen him. Even than a few seconds earlier when I glanced through the peephole. His clothes were clean, but they didn't fit or match. Eyes were bugged out of his head. The white stuff caked on the corner of his mouth I hadn't noticed at first. Shaking, just kind of disconnected from reality. He started banging on the window, shouting things like, "That's my girlfriend. You can't keep her in there. Let her out. Let her out. I'm coming, baby. I'm coming." I couldn't tell if it was meant as a threat or as reassurance. I was so scared, I was too scared to run or even move. I think my brother was almost as surprised by the sudden outburst as I was. He was rolling up his sleeves like he was preparing to go out there, and I was trying to make my voice work to beg him not to. But I was anxious, scared, embarrassed, and sad that I had missed all the signs leading up to this, all the opportunities to prevent it, that our friendship was never the wholesome thing that I thought it was. Though, of course, that's something that I had already begun to grapple with before this day, and just had so many thoughts swirling in my head, fear being chief among them. All I could do in the end was scream. Not words, just noise, and cover my ears to drown the whole situation out. Before my brother could charge out the door, he's an athletic guy, but I don't think he's ever actually been in a physical fight, Wendell punched through the window. Nothing actually happened when he punched, though, and there was an eerie moment of silence where just nobody moved. I think even I stopped screaming. But when he pulled his hand back, all hell just broke loose. A fair amount of blood started spurting out when he pulled his hand back through the glass. The things that he was shouting started to make even less sense, along the lines of, "Look what you did to me, this is a test, I told you I couldn't be stopped," and the look in his eyes just got even more distant. I think the sight of blood, which had always made my brother really squeamish, made him realize that this was real, and he finally yelled at me to call 911 while he leaned against the door, which Wendell was now repeatedly running into, even though he was nowhere close to breaking it down. To this day, too, I honestly don't even remember making the call, but apparently I did, because within 10 minutes, the police arrested Wendell without resistance. He kept trying to tell them that his girlfriend was trapped in the house and he'd come all this way to save her, and my poor brother was even momentarily handcuffed and had to explain that he hadn't taken me hostage. And probably one of the most haunting memories of the whole event is that as they carted Wendell away for arrest, he started singing opera music. I must say, too, that I've learned a lot of important common sense and life lessons from this whole saga. I was 14 years old when I had to live with my grandparents. I had to live with them because my sister was in college and my parents were now divorced. They lived in this sort of old bungalow type house. It was one story, and we have the upstairs that immediately goes up to the attic. An attic which no one really uses. We just put stuff in there. I mean, it's just too hot and stuffy to be up there for too long. The sole window up there didn't really work too, but the attic had old creaky wooden floors that I remember that I had to polish with a coconut shell because that's how we would do it here in the Philippines. That and my grandparents were just very traditional. Anyways, my door room was near the stairs leading up to the attic. Like, you open my door and then face right and the stairs would be immediately right there. I really hated that too every time that I left my room because I would expect that something would be immediately crawling down from the attic or something. Now, one night, my parents had to go and pick up my aunt's family from the airport, but because of the terrible traffic here, they had to leave at 7 p.m, and their expected arrival back home time would be, at most, 5 a.m. And so, I, a 14-year-old girl, would be alone at home the whole time. I told them that I would be fine here. I mean, we lived in a gated community, and we had tons of guard dogs. Everything should be fine. Well, so I thought. Before they left, we had already had dinner, so I was just stuck with cleaning the dishes and all that. And I was doing that. I could hear a bunch of, neighboring dogs barking a lot at something. I didn't really think much of it because the dogs always do that anyway. But when I finished cleaning up from dinner, I immediately had to lock every door and window and close all the lights before heading to bed. When I entered my room, the lights were open and it looked normal. My anime posters were on the wall, my closet was untouched, my bed was next to my barred, tinted windows. We had to tint them because I was on the first floor and my grandparents wanted to make sure that no one would peep in on a young girl's room. They were barred too because my uncle, who used to use the room, always escaped through there to go to parties and whatnot. This was my grandparents' solution to that. But nothing was out of place to alarm me. Everything was normal. Until I turned the lights off. As soon as I turned the lights off, a silhouette of a man was illuminated by the streetlights outside. He looked like he had thick curly hair and a skinny build. I thought that I must be hallucinating, so I turned the lights back on, but he was gone. Turned them off again, and he was back again. On again, and gone, and off again, and gone. I sort of sighed in relief at that. I must have just been seeing things, or something else was casting a shadow or something. But I double-locked my door just to be safe, one with the door knob and one of those door latch type things, and then after that, I just tucked myself in for a good night's sleep. It was hard to fall asleep that night, though, when a lot of dogs were barking outside. They weren't our dogs, obviously. It was a neighbor's dogs, but still, they just kept barking and barking. And I was finally falling asleep, too, when I heard something from above me moving. Something in the attic. I pushed down the thought I must have just been tricking myself again. I hugged my pillow. It's just rats, I said to myself. But these rats seemed mighty heavy and were also pushing furniture around by the sounds of things. My heart sank when I heard them hurriedly go down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I covered myself with my blanket and I waited for something. I was also wishing at that time that my parents would have given me a phone, but I only waited in bated breath. When suddenly I heard my doorknob being gently fiddled with. I wanted to vomit when I heard a click, followed by a quiet turn of the knob. The knob turned, but it didn't budge. Whoever was on the other side, when they noticed this, they tried to push it. This time I had finally stood up, shaking. I was a kid, home alone with no phone, no means of defense. All that was between me and whoever this was this thick door from the old days. I softly pushed my body up against the door, locked everything up again. I didn't want to make a sound. I tried not to. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want him to know that I was in here. I don't know why he stopped too, but eventually he did. I didn't go back to bed that night. I just sat there at the door, waiting, and it felt like forever, but eventually I heard footsteps go up the stairs, but I still sat there. Eventually I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, because there, at the window, that shadow was now back. I forced myself not to look. All I could think was, thank God that they were barred. I really don't remember what happened after that too. I think I must have fallen asleep, or I was just too scared to even think straight. All I really remember was the next day when my family and I were finally having breakfast. I casually brought it up. I said, "Lo," which means grandfather, "I think I heard footsteps up in the attic last night." And my grandmother just scoffed and said, "It's probably just rats." I never really brought it up again too after that, because I just didn't want them to worry. But I do know this. Our dogs were caged up near the gate and were far from my home, so they wouldn't have seen anything. And the only dogs who were near my room were the neighbors that night. Also, the next day I went to check to see what was outside of my window, and there was nothing outside of it that could have cast a shadow that looked like a man that night. And lastly, when I went up to check the attic window, it was wide open. So here's a little bit of background info about my family. We bought our house 3 years ago when my son was like 1. He started talking really well right after he turned 2. His speech went from being like 1 to 2 words at a time to short but complete sentences or phrases. I also quit my job away from home to work from home around this time in order to be able to stay with him 24/7. I started teaching him English online and nannying a little boy. This is important too because the little boy helps validate my son's experiences. So, I noticed my son has always stared and waved at nothing and all the other creepy stuff that babies do, but this was different. But one day he started randomly looking down the hallway and whining and crying. I asked him what he was crying about and he said, "It's scary." So I asked him what he was scared about and he said, "The bear." At this point I thought that maybe he saw one of his stuffed animals in his room that scared him and he was remembering it because you actually can't see into his room from the hallway. So I asked him, "Honey, what does the bear look like?" He stared at the same spot for a minute and then said, "It's big and it's black." Unlike a lot of other people, I'm not a skeptic and I've had a lot of paranormal experiences in my life, so I immediately believed him. He started crying again and ran back towards me. Fast forward like a week, and he's been doing this every day now, and one day I was watching the little boy that I nannied, and he too started creeping around the hallway looking at something. My son looked at the same spot, and they simultaneously started crying at the same time, and they both ran to me. This is when I asked my son where it was, and he pointed to the hallway. I couldn't see anything, and after a minute, he pulled on my dress and said, "Mummy, bear in there now," talking about the room that was my office back then. So I just sort of held both of their hands and walked towards the room, and they let go when we got there. I went inside the room, and again, I couldn't see anything. Meanwhile, they wouldn't go in there. Instead, they were peering around the doorway, crying. Honestly, whatever the thing was starting to tick me off too, because scaring my baby and his best friend was not cool. I had my mum come over a few days later, and we did a cleansing with sage. We also used a candle that you were supposed to blow out at the end to complete the ritual. My mum asked my son to blow it out since the activity seemed to be centered around him. He tried to do it about 5 times, and the flame would flicker, but for some reason would just never go out. So we redid the cleansing, and he was able to blow it out this time. He saw the bear again every few weeks or months, and we would do a cleansing each time, and it would go away temporarily. My son is 4 now, and he will still randomly mention this bear, especially if he's scared before bed. He'll say something like, "Are you sure that there are no monsters, not even the bear?" I have a 1-year-old daughter now, and her bedroom is the same room that used to be my office, and she'll randomly say, "Hey," to nothing and stuff like that, just like my son did. I'm not really looking for advice because I'm pretty used to this kind of stuff, but I thought that I would just share this to get it off my chest a bit. Thanks for listening. So I was on a hitchhiking adventure from BC, Canada to Antigua, Guatemala, which started in September of 2019. And this story is taken from the notes in my journal, which I wrote as soon as I could after this insane experience. Now, if you've ever hitchhiked before, then you know just how amazing it is and how many cool people you can meet. Out of the thousands of rides across 40 countries, I've only had 2 bad and or dangerous encounters thumbing it. And this was my second one. So I was taking a break from traveling to find weed trim work in California's Nevada City, a beautiful little town with a very interesting crowd, but I got stuck a few towns over for not getting a ride all day. I ended up sleeping a night at the Love's gas station, which I had done plenty of times before. I've slept in worse places, and at least Love's has a bathroom. In the morning, I was just a little more desperate to accept rides because nobody was stopping, and it had already been a whole day at this point, and I just wanted to get out of here if I'm being honest. A pickup truck is speeding past me and slams the brakes ahead, then slowly backs up at one point. Inside is a man and a woman in their late 50s, and he says in a husky voice, "Where you headed, boy?" Nevada City, but any distance helps." "Well, get on in. We're going to Yuba." They seem normal enough, even without most of their teeth and hair, so I jumped in, and it all happened in rapid succession. 1, I tossed my bag in the back and jumped in. 2, I shut the door. 3, I notice a pile of guns and bullets on the floor. And 4, before I have time to rethink my decision, we speed off. So, as I'm trying to assess whether or not I'm in danger, they start telling me how this guy just got out of jail for aggravated assault, how he beat that guy so bad that he can't think straight no more, and they just both laugh. She's holding his seatbelt over his chest. They both smell terrible, and they start asking how much money I have, and I think, yep, I'm definitely not safe here. After hitchhiking all this way, I don't look particularly wealthy. I'm filthy, I need a shower, I look no different than the stereotypical homeless guy if I'm being honest. So I try to seem more poor than I am and more tough than I am too. So I tell them, "Yeah, I'm pretty broke, man. That's why I'm going to the city. I'm hoping to make some cash trimming." The man looks me in the eye. "Well, you'll find it alright. You'll find it good. Don't be afraid to do no dirty work. If people try, and they'll try, to mess with you, you mess with them first. You get what I'm saying? Put your eyes on the damn road." The woman points forward and he swerves back to the right lane. He asks me if I smoke, and knowing that California has legalized weed, I put two and two together. He's offering me a joint. So I say, yeah, I smoke. With a wild look in his eyes, he exclaims, "Great," and we turn off the highway and start down a dirt road. I'm more than worried, and I look behind us. In the back of the truck is my bag, a chainsaw, a pickaxe, and a plastic tarp over something. And that didn't help my anxiety, that's for sure. Finally, though, we stop on the front of a clearing. The woman takes out, not a joint, but a meth pipe. It's the first time that I've seen a meth pipe too, and a lot of things start to make sense. While he lights up and exhales into the car, I've never seen smoke so white. I roll the window down as fast as possible because I really don't want to smoke that. The woman takes some as well, and they tell me how they're going to collect money that a woman owes them or something. That woman's going to pay today, one way or another. Damn straight. She better have that money. I'm going to grab her and say, "Where's my money?" Oh, she'll have it all right. She'll have it or else. Say, son, you ever steal something? Because we could make $20,000 today. I don't know exactly how to answer this guy, and he repeats $20,000 today. And then he says, "Here, smoke some of this," and hands me the pipe. Nothing like meth, ain't that right? I gently reject it and say that meth's not really my thing, which he surprisingly takes well and smokes some more before putting it away and driving off back towards the highway. His driving is terrible now too, swerving, speeding, hitting brakes abruptly, and starts trying to convince me to help them steal marijuana plants. "Yeah, you'll hold my gun and I'll drill the hole, and I'll keep a lookout." "Yeah, she'll keep a lookout. Now, you got to be careful if you hear the dogs though, because those guys are nasty. Nasty. See this bite?" And he reveals what looks like a terrible scar on his arm. I didn't really know how to get out of this situation at this point, so I sounded as confident as possible and said that I was meeting a friend to look for work together and they'd be expecting me today. We neared the end of Yuba City where they pull over to the side. "Well, it's your funeral. You sure you don't want to eat?" "Fine by me, but if you ever want that cash, just give us a call." Hands me his number. Heck no, I think. But I say, "Thanks, yeah, I will," while quickly retrieving my bag and smiling nervously. The woman says with a wave, "Take care now, God bless," and then they speed off. At this point, I'm standing on the side of the road just thinking, what the heck was that? And I am very happy to be out of that car. I really don't know what was under that tarp, and who knows, maybe I don't want to know, but I think that they were very serious about robbing whoever it was that they were saying that they were going to rob. Like I said earlier though, it's one of only 2 times that I've honestly felt like my life was in danger. This happened a couple of years ago now. I was walking my boyfriend to the train station late at night as he had spent the weekend with me and he lived in another city. We had just been to the cinema, which was near the train station, so I didn't come out just to walk him to the train. The station was in my direction to get home anyway. The film ended around just after midnight. We said our goodbyes, and when the train pulled out, I waved before turning and then heading home. The safest way to get home was through a mall. The mall was actually abandoned at this time, but they leave the lights on and you can walk through it with the shops boarded up. The end of the mall has a revolving door, which I normally go through and then walk the 10 or so minutes home. I usually run if it's late or dark outside because I watch way too many scary documentaries and I'm a bit paranoid. But I get to the end of the mall and there's a group of guys just sat around the escalator, about 5 or 6 of them. They look over and start shouting things, but I have no idea what language they're speaking, so I don't know what they're saying about me or to me. I ignore them and head to the revolving door. 2 of the guys get up and follow me though. By this point, I'm getting pretty nervous because it's late, empty, and it's just me and some guys being obnoxious. I quickly go through the revolving door and it just stops with a hard thud. I turn around and the two guys are now holding it shut. Then the other guys get up and start laughing and saying things to me. Another one started holding the door and I kept trying to push it to get out. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours. In reality, it probably went on for like 20 minutes before they started to yank it so that I had to go back into the mall. My mind was pretty much racing at this point at what I'll do next. I thought that I could scream or run through the mall or the other way if I was pulled back in. But they were taunting me at this point and pulling and pushing the door. I started banging on the glass trying to get the attention of anyone that might be out at that time of night. And that's when they pushed it one last time. I flew out the door without even thinking, and I ran as fast as I could up the road without looking back. When I got far enough and I couldn't hear anyone behind me, I looked back and none of them followed me. It seemed like they were doing it to scare me for fun more than anything, but I can't be sure. I then ran all the way home crying and slammed the main door of my apartment building behind me, automatic lock, then walked up the stairs to my door and just got into bed in my clothes. I felt so ashamed and scared by the situation that I just couldn't find the courage to tell my boyfriend or anyone about it. But it's one of those memories that's stuck with me. And these days, I avoid them all at night, and I also try to avoid walking home in the dark, if I can help it. So, I saw the rake, or something that I call the rake. I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I know what I saw. I was driving home late at night in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. I was actually driving on a back road with my buddy, taking him home near my house. It must have been around 12 a.m. when, out of nowhere, this thing just appeared in the headlights in the middle of the road. It was crouching over some sort of roadkill. It was humanoid. It was pale. It looked like it had no ears, but it honestly looked like a Wendigo from Until Dawn. It looked like it was about 7 feet tall, abnormally long arms, no ears, no nose, and some really nasty teeth. It wasn't skinny though, but its skin was tight with ribs visible, and like long claws on the end of its hands too. I was just barely able to dodge it with my truck as I was driving considerably quickly. As I swerved around it, it seemed like time sort of slowed down, and it looked up from the roadkill it was eating and stared at me as I passed by it. Its eyes were yellow, and I immediately brake upon getting past it and yell at my friend, "What the heck was that? Did you see that?" His eyes were wide with fear, and he nods at me. I throw the truck in reverse, but when I approached the roadkill, it was gone. But my friend claims to have seen it too, so I know that I wasn't just seeing things or was crazy or something. When I was a kid, I actually read some stories about the rake at some point, and I know the rake isn't real, so maybe they invented a creature that already existed. Like I said, I have no idea what it was or where it came from. It was only there for half a second, but I know what I saw. If you have any questions about it, then please do ask, because who knows, maybe it'll help me remember something. I've been doing a lot of research too. I really want to find out what this thing was. In fact, I've kind of been obsessed with it. I need answers, and I won't stop looking. This happened when both me and my friend Jay were 15. I was spending the night at his house, as I often did. It was a normal enough night. We watched movies, played a couple of video games, and stayed up way too late. It must have been about 2 a.m., I think, when we heard a loud banging coming from the front door. Luckily, at that time, we were in his kitchen, at the back of the house, so no one could see us. But we were spooked because there shouldn't have been anyone at the door at this hour, but we figured that it must have been just some sort of a drunk person and they would go away soon enough. After about 30 seconds, there was more banging on the door though, and yelling that neither of us could actually understand. It sounded like an adult man, and he sounded angry, so we were both pretty scared at this point. he texted his mum, who we thought was upstairs, but she said that she had left a bit before without saying anything. She did that often enough. She liked to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night sometimes, so we didn't pay any attention or notice when she left. But at this point, we honestly didn't know what to do, as we were scared to call the police based off of past experiences with cops in our small town being not the best. So we turned off the kitchen light and we sort of ducked down on the ground. We heard the banging and yelling getting louder, and I decided to see who it was, if it was anybody that we knew. I sort of army crawled through the dining room, which was also dark, and peeked through the door to the living room, which is where the front door was. There's also a huge window by the door that you can see right into the dining room through, so I was pretty careful not to be seen. I couldn't really see any details of the man, but he looked to be about 6 feet tall and definitely had grey hair. I crawled back to Jay and we quietly decided what to do next. We heard the knowing stop, so we decided to wait a bit before seeing if it was safe. We also decided to go under the table in the dining room in case he tried to come around the back or something, which is where the kitchen was. After around 10 minutes of silence, we rock, paper, scissored for who had to check if he was there, and of course I lost. So I again army crawled to the dining room door, and I saw the man staring through the window, hands cupped against the glass, and this time I made eye contact with him the moment that he saw me, and I loudly said, "Oh crap," causing my friend to panic and crawl behind me. I saw him pull out his phone, and he told me later that he was texting his mum to come home and save us. The man started yelling again, and this time we could make out a bit more of what he was actually saying. It was mostly cussing, although I definitely heard the phrase, "I'm going to kill you," in there a couple of times at least. I quickly looked past the man to see if any of the neighbours seemed to notice him, but no such luck. I crawled back out of his sight and again discussed what to do with my friend. We decided at this point to go into the basement for safety, which you could get to by moving the fridge. A really confusing house, I know, but it was really old and not meant for modern-sized appliances. But we pull out the fridge and we get into the basement, feeling mostly safe but still pretty terrified. It was at this point too that I actually start having a panic attack, although I'm trying to hold it together as best as I can for Jay, who was also on the verge of a panic attack. When we hear a gunshot and shattering glass from above us. I cover my mouth so I don't scream. Jay and I looked at each other terrified, and we hear loud footsteps and yelling above us, the man asking where we went. We hear him going upstairs and running around up there a bit. He eventually comes back down and starts turning over furniture, I'm assuming to find us. After what felt like hours, but must have been only minutes, Jay's mum pulls into the driveway, which thankfully scares this guy as he runs out the back door in the kitchen. Jay and I get out of the basement and we run to greet his mum, never happier to see her. She was obviously quite shocked by the state of the house, and she hugged us, happy that we were safe and scared by just how close we were to being hurt. We were all pretty scared after that, and we didn't sleep much that night. But after that night, they had much better security installed, and we went over the safety protocol if anything ever happened again. And, luckily for us, it hasn't happened again yet, although when I do go over his house from time to time, I'm still pretty scared by it all. In the end, too, we never really called the police too, because we knew that there wasn't much they could have done anyway, just pretty much cleaned up and moved on, which tends to be what they do all the time anyway. This happened 24 years ago in July of 1996. I had finished my term of service for the Army. I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and decided at midnight that I would out-process and travel back to Wisconsin. All day I was so anxious to go that I actually had trouble sleeping. Finally, at 23:45, I got out of bed and went to sign out with the desk sergeant. Of course, knowing people wanted to sign out at midnight, he decided to do his rounds. You can't actually leave until you get your final sign-off with the sergeant and turn in your room key. So I waited and I waited, and finally, at about 2:45, he returned. I turned my key in, got the sign off, and at 3:30, I was on my way. At first, I was so full of adrenaline that I felt like I could drive for days. Unfortunately, though, that adrenaline didn't last that long, and by the time that I was getting through Dallas, I was sort of nodding off. So I decided just past Denton that I should pull over at the next rest stop and take a quick nap until the sun came up. And at this stage, I could barely keep my eyes open when I came up to a stop. I pulled over and I got out of my car to get some fresh air and throw something away and to get a bit of a look at my surroundings. There were only about 3 other cars and 2 semi-trucks there. It was one of those picnic stops, I think, and not a rest stop, so no restrooms. But I threw my trash away and I glanced at a poster of a few missing persons, but I really didn't pay much attention to it. I went back to my car, which was a basic Geo Metro. No radio, no power windows, no power locks. I just cracked the windows and I turned on the boombox that I had for some tunes and laid down to get some sleep. Now, I must have been asleep for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, I would say at most, when I felt my car shake just slightly. I cracked an eye open and looked and didn't see anything, so I just blew it off as maybe a gust of wind or something and went back to sleep. I then heard, though, what sounded like my door handle being pulled and scratching on the door key. I then sat up quickly, but I didn't see anyone there again. I looked at all the windows and I didn't see anyone. So, again, I sort of just shrugged it off as me being tired, and I laid back down and turned up the radio. Being a Texas night in July, it was actually pretty hot, but I was so tired that I just laid back down. A few more minutes later, I heard the door handle again, though, and the car really shook this time. I sat up quickly, and I saw a man standing at the passenger side looking in. Even though it was really hot and humid, he was wearing a red sweatshirt with the hood up, and I couldn't actually see his face. Being young and stupid, though, and just out of the military, I yelled at him, "What the heck do you want?" He just stared at me, so, like an idiot, I got out of my car. Mind you, I'm only 5'6", but man, was I angry. And he just walked off towards the picnic tables, like nothing happened. All the while, I'm yelling at him that if he came back, that I would take him out. I decided at this point that I would just drive on from there. So I got back in and I just went on my way. Even though I was really upset, only about 10 miles down the road, I was just super tired again. Luckily, though, about another 10 miles down I-35, there was another picnic stop. Not sure why North Texas doesn't have rest areas, but for some reason they just don't seem to. But I pulled into the second picnic stop and I backed into a spot just in case I needed to leave quickly again. Not sure why, but there was only one other car there and no semi-trucks this time. I again locked the doors, cracked the windows, and I turned on my boombox again. I fell asleep right away, and about 30 minutes later, I hear a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jumped up and looked around, but there was nobody there. This time, I got out of the car, which was very stupid of me, but I had my macho military attitude going, but again, nobody was around. I sort of just assumed that it was my nerves from the other stop, so I got back into my car, made sure to double check the doors were locked again, and closed my eyes. This time, I was too amped to fall asleep though, so I just laid there with my eyes closed, when suddenly I felt like somebody was looking at me or watching me, and so I opened my eyes. I saw that same guy standing there again with the red sweatshirt, hood up. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could see that he was smiling at me this time. I popped up quick and I tried quickly to open the door and bump him, and being a cheap Geo, since the doors were locked, it didn't open. He walked backwards, still staring at me, and by the time that I got out, he was about 30 feet away, facing me. It was fairly dark, but as I looked him over, he looked really skinny, but must have been about 6'2", maybe 6'3". but I still felt like I could take him with my military experience. He was wearing the red hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and green tennis shoes, and for some reason I thought the shoes looked a bit odd. And as I was standing there, I could see something shine every now and then as he stood there just sort of staring at me. I believed in that moment that it may have been a machete. I quickly reached into my back seat and grabbed my baseball bat and started yelling at this guy to come get some. I'm not sure why I did that, but he actually started walking towards me, and I took a few steps towards him, not really thinking. As I got about 5 feet from my car, he was about 15 feet from me. A yellow van pulled up real quick and parked just off to the side of my car. I finally realized what was really happening, and I saw 2 guys, also wearing hooded sweatshirts, in the van. Before they could get out, I ran back to my car. I had left the keys in the ignition. Since I had backed in, I was able to cut out a hard right and peeled my car out of there as quickly as I could. I was actually pretty lucky too, because being a manual car, I didn't stall the car because the other 2 guys were out of the van, and the first guy was just about to my car when I finally got out of there. I jumped back on the interstate, and I didn't stop until I was about 20 miles into Oklahoma. I eventually stopped for gas, and I used the restroom there. And in the restroom, I noticed that same flyer I barely glanced at in the first picnic stop. It was basically a flyer with like several missing persons on it, and then I noticed too that it was warning people not to stop for long periods of time at the rest areas. And it described a possible suspect as being possibly 6 foot, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt. And upon seeing that, I went completely white. Needless to say, since it was daylight, I just drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin, wide awake after that. To this day, I'm really not sure why, but I never reported it to the number on the flyer or told anyone about it. But I now live in North Texas and pass those 2 picnic stops every day on my way to work. And I must admit that I think about it quite often. I often wonder if maybe they got anyone else or if they were caught. I did try looking it up at one point, but I couldn't really find any stories about it on the internet. So today I was doing my regular shopping with my children, my 3-year-old and my 6-month-old. While shopping, my 3-year-old got a little wooden doll. It's a kind of old school style wooden block person. I haven't been able to get a photo as she won't put it down, but she started calling it Daniel. But that was no big deal to me, and we ordered Uber Eats for dinner that night, and then as I looked at the status, it says, "Your driver's name is Daniel." I sort of just brushed that off as a coincidence. I put a YouTube video on while I ate, and it was just a short story. The first sentence, though, of the story was, "I don't want to go to Daniel's house." And that was when things started feeling a little bit weird. She wanted to put this doll in the bathroom sink while she showered, and I told her no and to put it in her room. I showered her, and then she got dressed and instantly grabbed this doll again. I put her to bed, not noticing at all that she still had it. And a couple of minutes later, she starts yelling. I went in to ask her what was wrong and noticed that she was still holding this doll. I asked her who she was talking to, and she said Daniel. I asked her what they were talking about, and she said that Daniel was scared. I asked her why he was scared, and she said because his family went into the water. Now, she has never done anything like this before, and I feel like I'm being watched too all the time since moving into this house just over a year ago. I've had it in the past, so I've never really thought much about it until now. But the last few nights, I've felt like I'm going to see someone on my back deck when I go out to make my 6-month-old a bottle during the night. Obviously, there's nobody there, but a few nights ago, I could have swore that I saw someone duck down inside my 3-year-old's playhouse out in the yard. There wasn't anybody there, as the window I had saw it through was that low that I could see her head even when she's sitting inside of it, so I could confirm that there was actually nobody there, but I could have sworn that I saw someone. I have no idea what's going on, but any advice would help. It could all be coincidence, I know, but I could use a second opinion. Also, I should probably mention that we just got home from swimming lessons not too long ago, and usually she refuses to do anything without the teacher holding her, but today she just dove straight off the edge and swam on her own. Even the teacher was surprised with her sudden confidence, and again, this could just be nothing, but I thought that it would be worth mentioning it since she said that his family went into the water. And also, for about 10 minutes this afternoon, she was just running around the backyard screaming Daniel, as if he was a lost animal or something. I have no idea why she's doing it, as she had the doll in her hand the whole time, but, man, whatever's going on, I just don't get it.